Here is what no one at the ceremony understood. The woman crying in pale gold at the edge of the golden hall was not losing her power that night. She was deciding what to do with it. Kristina Walton had been Ravenshade's Luna for 3 years, and in those 3 years she had done things for that pack that no alpha had ever asked her to do, because they had never known enough to ask. She had sealed an ancient curse every full moon, pressing her palms against stone that burned and bleeding quietly into the dark so that the wolves sleeping above would wake whole. She had covered the gaps in Greg's rule so neatly that the pack believed his strength was natural. She had carried in silence the knowledge that could bring the entire Ravenshade bloodline to its knees. She had done it because she loved him. And then Greg Gartman stood in the hall where he once promised she would rule beside him forever, and he marked another woman without once looking for Kristina in the crowd. But here is what Greg did not understand. He had not just betrayed his Luna. He had just removed the only woman keeping Ravenshade alive. She removed her ring. She set it down. She left. What happened next was not revenge. It was consequence. And there is a difference. And while the pack cheered for their future, the real future of Ravenshade was walking quietly toward the door. If you love stories where betrayal has consequences and quiet women are never as powerless as people think, subscribe because this is where Ravenshade begins to understand what Greg has done. The claiming hall had always smelled like beeswax and old stone and something older underneath, iron and moonlight pressed into the walls over centuries of ceremony, of blood spilled in ritual and promises made before witnesses who would remember long after the people who made them were gone. Kristina had loved it once, the way you love things you believe are permanent. She stood near the second stone pillar from the left, not at the front where Luna belonged, not at the back where she might have hidden, and held a small cup of ceremonial wine she had not tasted. The gold wolf banners hung from the black vaulted rafters above her, torchlight catching their embroidered edges until they seemed to breathe. Every carved detail of the hall she knew by heart, the wolf head keystones above each arch, the black marble floor shot through with veins of gold, the stained glass panels above the eastern wall that threw colored fire across the stone whenever a ceremony lamp was lit directly beneath them. This hall was Ravenshade's memory made permanent. Sacred, massive, cold in the way of things built to outlast everyone inside them. Tonight it was packed with witnesses. Elders in formal gray occupied the front rows, their faces arranged in the careful blankness of men who already knew the outcome of a thing. Warriors in dressed leather stood along the walls like brackets. Servants were pressed into the back corners, quiet and watchful. 3 sets of visiting envoys from neighboring packs had arranged themselves near the side columns, and Kristina had noticed them when she entered, their eyes moving over the room the way rival wolves always moved, cataloging, measuring, deciding what the ceremony meant for them. She had smiled at them from habit. She had been the one, after all, who negotiated their invitations. Something was wrong. She had known it for nearly 2 weeks. She had been ruthlessly, quietly honest with herself about almost everything in her 3 years as Luna, and she had been trying very hard not to be honest about this particular thing. Greg had changed. Not in the way of a man weighted under alpha burdens. She knew that version of him well by now, had learned its silences and what they needed, had developed a kind of fluency in the specific exhaustion of a man carrying a fractured pack toward wholeness. This was different. This was the particular stillness of a man who had already made his decision and had not yet settled on how to deliver it. She had noticed it first in the council chamber, 3 weeks ago. Greg had always turned his shoulders slightly toward her when an elder challenged him, not for help, exactly, but with the unconscious instinct of a man who knew his blind sides. Then one morning she noticed he had stopped. His shoulders stayed square and forward, and when she offered a point that countered Elder Marcellus's argument, Greg had received it without acknowledgement and moved the session forward as if the words had come from the air. Not dismissing her, precisely. Something more like the specific way a person stops looking at a photograph they have decided to take down from the wall. Then in the mornings. The small things she had stopped naming because naming them would require her to do something about them. The way their easy breakfast silences had become a different kind of quiet, the kind that takes effort to maintain. The way he no longer absently reached across the table toward her cup. She had told herself it was the pressure from the elders about bloodline succession. She had told herself the eastern border was genuinely destabilizing and he was simply carrying it privately. She had told herself love did not look the same in every season of a long thing, and that she should give him room. She had told herself a great many careful, loving things. The truth was that the part of her connected to the old wards, the part that was not quite Luna and not quite Wolf and not quite anything she had a name for, the part that had grown in her quietly during 3 years of descending the hidden stairway on full moon nights and pressing her blood into the stone to renew the seals, that part of her had been unsettled for weeks. A low crawling unease beneath everything, like hearing a sound you cannot place and cannot stop listening for. She had told herself it was the approach of the full moon cycle. She had told herself it was the cold coming early this year. She understood now, standing in the torchlight with the wine cooling in her hand and her smile held in place like a locked door, that it had never been either of those things. The hall shifted. The specific movement of a crowd turning toward something already decided. Shoulders rotating, heads lifting together, the ambient noise dropping half a register as though the room itself were drawing breath. An elder coughed once into his closed fist. A child near the front row was hushed by her mother and did not try again. Even the visiting envoys who had spent the evening exchanging quiet opinions behind their cups went still. Greg stepped onto the raised claiming platform at the center of the hall. He was magnificent. She had never once stopped knowing that, and she did not stop knowing it now, even with the cold thing moving through the center of her chest. The black and gold ceremonial armor sat on his frame like it had been forged specifically for the architecture of him. The breadth of his shoulders, the particular way he carried authority as if it were a physical material pressed into his bones. The fur-trimmed cloak spread behind him. His dark hair fell loose around his jaw in a way she had seen 1,000 mornings and 1,000 ceremonies, and every single time it had meant something to her. She looked for his eyes. He did not look for hers. And then, from the side entrance on the eastern wall, the entrance reserved in Ravenshade tradition for the Luna, a woman stepped onto the claiming platform. Kristina had seen her twice in the past month. Once in the elder wing, moving through the corridor with the careful confidence of someone who has been told where to walk and has practiced the route. Once near the great hall kitchen entrance, speaking with Marcellus in a voice too low to carry. She was dark-haired and tall and built with the particular composed elegance of a woman who has been told since childhood that her appearance was an instrument of power. She was beautiful. Kristina could acknowledge that without flinching. The gown she wore was red. Not the soft ceremonial red of festival cloth, or the warm red of Ravenshade's warding candles. This was deep, saturated, deliberate, the red of old blood, of conquest, of the blood claim rights that Ravenshade tradition reserved for succession and fertility ceremonies. It was not an accident. No one had put that woman in that color without knowing exactly what it announced. Kristina understood in the space between one heartbeat and the next precisely what she was witnessing. She put her hand over her mouth. Not to muffle a scream. There was no scream rising, only a vast, organizing silence, the kind that arrives not from peace but from the moment a person understands that everything they feared is simply, completely true, and the time for doubt has finished. She watched Greg turn to face the woman in red. She watched him speak to the assembled pack in the carrying voice he used for declarations, the one she had helped him practice in his first year of rule when his delivery was still rough at the edges, when he would come to her afterward and ask what she thought and actually listen to the answer. She could not hear the specific words from where she stood, only the cadence of them, and the cadence was formal, final, irreversible. She heard legacy. She heard bloodline. She heard the future of Ravenshade. She watched him lower his head toward the woman's neck. The mate bond cracked. Not broke, not yet. Cracked. A seam splitting under pressure too long sustained, white-hot and then immediately horribly cold, moving from the center of her chest outward through her arms, her hands, her fingertips. She had known, technically, that an alpha marking a second Luna while the first bond held was not just a betrayal. It was a supernatural violation, a tearing of something old and deep and not meant to be unmade this way. She had read about it once in the old records, years ago, and set the page aside without finishing it because she had never imagined she would need the information. Her knees wanted to give. She did not let them. The hall erupted. Ravenshade's wolves, her pack, the people she had bled quietly for in the dark beneath this floor, threw their voices toward the vaulted ceiling in a celebration she felt like a physical wave. The sound crashed over her, around her, through her. She stood inside it the way you stand inside rain when there is nowhere left to go. Present, unmoving, already past the point of trying to stay dry. The woman in red turned slightly, and for one moment her eyes found Kristina in the crowd. There was triumph in them. The bright, clean triumph of someone who has won a declared contest. But Kristina looked past her, toward Greg, who was receiving the congratulations of the front row elders with his hand raised and his jaw set in the angle she had once loved. He had not looked at her once. Not when he spoke of bloodlines. Not when the bite was made. Not when the bond between them, which she had tended and protected and carried for 3 years, was torn. He looked, she realized, relieved. The way a man looks when something complicated has been resolved for him. Kristina lowered her hand from her mouth. She looked down at the moonstone ring on her left hand. Greg had pressed it onto her finger himself, in the private ceremony before their first public claiming, his forehead against hers in the candlelight, his voice low and unhesitating. "You are the only steady thing in my world, Kristina. You will always rule beside me." She had believed him, not naively, but with the deliberate, clear-eyed faith of a woman who had decided that this man and this pack in this life were worth building, worth protecting, worth bleeding for in the dark when no one was watching. She slid the ring from her finger. She walked to the ceremonial fountain at the edge of the platform circle and set it on the stone lip. Carefully. The way you set down something that was once important and is now simply an object. Then she turned and walked toward the back of the hall. The crowd was still celebrating. No one moved aside for her. She was already becoming invisible, the displaced Luna, the woman stepping out of a frame someone else had been placed inside. A few of the older she-wolves near the middle rows saw her go. She noticed their expressions, shame in some of them, grief in others, and in the face of one elder she had worked alongside for 2 years, something that looked very much like fear. That was the one that told her everything she needed to know about, who had understood all along and said nothing. She reached the back corridor. The old servants' passage, low-arched and unlit, that ran behind the claiming hall toward the private family wing. She had used it 100 times. Greg had never learned it existed. At the entrance to the corridor she paused. She did not look back at the celebration. She did not look back at Greg in his black and gold, at the woman in red beside him, at the golden hall blazing with the joy of a pack that believed it had just gained something. She thought of the stairway. The hidden door beneath the old family altar, 40 steps down into stone and cold, and the smell of iron and deep earth and something living that was not supposed to be living. She thought of the moon key in the hollowed heel of her traveling boot. She had put it there 4 days ago, without fully acknowledging to herself that she was preparing for something. She thought of the blood map, folded into the lining of her winter cloak at the back of her wardrobe. She thought of the warding journal, small and water-stained, that contained 3 years of seals and rites and the names of every wolf in the pack whose bloodline carried the curse's mark. She had packed the cloak this morning. She had not asked herself why. She understood now. Behind her, the hall was gold and fire and celebration, the sound of Ravenshade believing in its own future. Beneath it, 60 feet of stone and old root and sealed darkness below the black marble floor. Something that had been listening to this entire ceremony exhaled slowly, and waited to see what Kristina would do next. She descended the old stairway alone in the dark while the pack celebrated overhead. No one saw her go. No one knew what she was carrying when she reached the bottom. By morning, the floor of the golden hall would begin to breathe. The corridor swallowed her. One moment there was candlelight and the distant roar of the pack celebration pressing through the walls. Then the servants' passage curved left and down, and the sounds of the hall became something felt rather than heard, a low vibration in the stone beneath her feet, like music remembered rather than played. The torches here were unlit. She did not need them. She had walked this route in the dark so many times that her body knew each turn before her mind did. The tunnels changed the deeper she went. The first corridor was still palace, dressed stone, fitted joints, the faint smell of oil and old wood. By the second descent, the dressed stone gave way to raw-cut rock. By the third, the rock gave way to something older still, walls that had not been shaped by tools but seemed to have been persuaded into their current form, as if the earth itself had agreed once to hold space for what would be placed here. The gold of Ravenshade's surface, its banners, its marble, its careful performance of power, did not reach this place. Down here there was only cold and dark, and the smell of iron and deep root and the particular stillness of things that have been waiting a very long time. The iron door stood where it always stood. Black, floor to ceiling, carved on every panel with warnings in the old tongue, words she had translated in her first year as Luna from records the elders kept in a locked archive they had never intended her to find. What is sealed here is not dead. What is not dead cannot be abandoned. What is abandoned will wake hungry. She had read those lines so many times they no longer felt like warnings. They felt like her job description. She reached into the narrow gap between 2 foundation stones to the left of the door and retrieved the moonstone ring. She had set it in the fountain upstairs, yes, but not the real one. The ring Greg had given her, the public ring, the symbol, the promise, was cubic zirconia set in silver plate. A replica she had commissioned 2 years ago, after the night she first understood what the chamber required and what it meant that she was the one required to enter it. The original moonstone was older than Greg's entire bloodline. It had been waiting in the altar alcove below when she first descended, as if it had been placed there for her specifically, as if some older architecture of fate had known she was coming. She pressed it against the door's central panel. Then she drew the small blade from the cord at her wrist, opened her left palm and pressed the cut against the lock. The door opened without sound. The smell reached her first, black earth and cold metal, and underneath both, something organic and wrong, the smell of a living thing growing in a place where living things should not grow. She stepped inside and held the ring up so its faint lunar light spread across the chamber. The roots had grown since last month. They coiled around the foundation stones in thick, dark ropes, pressing into the joints, tracing the cracks, feeling their way outward with the slow insistence of something that had infinite patience and no morality. At the chamber's center, cradled in a natural hollow in the bedrock, the moon heart pulsed. She had never found a better word for it than that. It was silver-white, roughly the size of a human heart, and it moved, not visibly but perceptibly, the way a sleeping chest moves. A slow, contained rhythm. She had pressed her palm against it once, in the early months, and felt it push back against her hand like something that recognized her. She had spent her first 6 months as Luna believing Greg's pack was simply strong. Disciplined leadership, loyal warriors, well-managed borders. She had believed that until a full moon night 2 years ago when she heard voices beneath the hall during the deep hour, layered, hollow, speaking in a register below sound, and followed them here. The records she found in the alcove archive had taken 3 weeks to translate fully and another month to accept. Greg's great-grandfather had made a pact. Power in exchange for corruption. Dominance in exchange for a curse written into every Alpha heir's blood. And a writer buried in the fine language of the original agreement, which the elders had known about and concealed for 4 generations. The curse required a Luna's willing sacrifice to stay contained. Not death. Something quieter and longer. Monthly blood. Monthly renewal. Monthly choice to stay and bleed in the dark for people who would never know you were doing it. The elders had told her, when she confronted them, that revealing the truth would fracture the pack. Would invite enemies. Would destroy Greg's authority before he had fully established it. She had believed them. She had chosen the pack over herself, the way the system had been designed to make her choose. She crossed to the alcove and retrieved the blood map, a sheet of wolfskin parchment that glowed faintly at each name written on it, silver for the clean lines, black for the infected ones, and folded it into the interior pocket of her traveling cloak. She took the warding journal from its shelf. She looked at the moon heart for a long moment. She did not take it. She did not damage it. She was not here to murder the innocent wolves sleeping above her, who had not chosen their alpha's bloodline or his ancestors' bargain. She was only here to take what was hers, the tools, the knowledge, the map, the things that made her the keeper. Without her, the wards would hold through 1 full moon cycle. Perhaps 2 if the roots were slow. After that, Ravenshade would discover what it had been paying for. She tucked the moon key into her boot, pulled her cloak closed and walked toward the far tunnel. The old exit, the one that surfaced in the tree line beyond the eastern wall, that she had located and cleared 2 years ago and never mentioned to anyone. Behind her, the moon heart continued its slow pulse in the dark. And at the base of the iron door, where her blood had opened the lock, the first black root found the crack in the stone. And split it open. Above her, Ravenshade Hall blazed with music and gold. Below it, the rot had already begun. Greg woke expecting to feel like a king. Instead he felt the wrongness before he opened his eyes. A low, sourceless unease in the air of the alpha chamber, the way a room feels when a window has been left open in a storm and the cold has already moved into the walls. Serafina slept beside him, dark hair spread across the pillow, one hand resting near his arm but not quite touching it. She was beautiful. He had made the right decision. He told himself this clearly, the way you tell yourself things that should not need telling. He rose, dressed, and went to meet his pack's new morning. The first report reached him before breakfast. 2 young warriors, brothers both from the Karath line, both decorated in last season's border skirmishes, had gone at each other in the training yard with a violence no drill required. Not sparring. The older one had locked his hands around his brother's throat with a look on his face, witnesses said, like he did not recognize him. It had taken 4 men to pull them apart. The older brother, when released, had wept without knowing why. Greg was told the ceremony had stirred the pack's energy. Transitions were unsettling. He nodded and moved on. The second report came from the nursery wing. 7 children, none older than 6, had woken before dawn from the same dream. Something howling beneath the floor. Something that wanted to come up. Greg said children had vivid imaginations after a late night. He moved on. By mid-morning the kitchen fires had turned blue twice. The cold, flat blue of warding light gone wrong, the color Kristina had once told him meant old seals were thinning, but the cook who reported it could not remember which color was normal, and Greg chose not to ask anyone who might. A servant found black veins threading through the stone near the base of the claiming hall's east wall. Greg looked at them for a long moment and told the woman they were mineral striations and she was to say nothing further about it. He was still telling himself these things when Elder Marcellus found him in the corridor outside the council chamber and asked, with a specific careful quietness, where Kristina was. Greg's jaw tightened. Her chambers. She did not sleep in her chambers. He sent 2 guards to confirm the obvious. They returned with the news he had not let himself anticipate. The room was emptied. Wardrobe cleared. Journals gone. The small cedar box where she kept her correspondence, gone. The guards had checked the fountain in the claiming hall. The moonstone ring was not there either. Not the replica. Not the original. Nothing. She's being dramatic, Greg said. His voice was flat and controlled and correct. She's trying to make a point. Send riders north and east. She'll have gone to her mother's territory or the retreat house past the ridge. Find her and bring her back. The riders were dispatched. Greg went to find Serafina. She was in the great hall, attempting to instruct the household staff on the new morning protocols. The servants listened with their eyes slightly too steady, the particular attentiveness of people waiting for an authority to stop speaking so they could return to their actual work. 2 young children had been brought in by their mothers for a blessing, a Luna tradition Kristina had maintained every week without announcement. Serafina reached toward the nearest child, a small girl of perhaps 4, and the girl turned her face into her mother's neck and began to cry with the total conviction of someone who has encountered something her body does not accept. Serafina's smile held. But her eyes moved just once toward the door. The uncontrolled shift happened at midday. A senior warrior named Fun, 12 years in Ravenshade service, not a young man, not an unstable one, shifted in the middle of the main courtyard in full sunlight without warning and without stopping himself. He came back to his human form shaking and unable to explain it. The wolves around him stepped back in the instinctive way of a pack that has just witnessed something that should not be possible. The council convened within the hour. Marcellus waited until the room had emptied of everyone but Greg before he said, quietly, that Kristina had managed certain old rites connected to the hall's foundations. Monthly. Since her first year as Luna. He used careful words. Maintenance, tradition, spiritual continuity. Greg asked what that meant specifically. Marcellus looked at the table and said it was complex and perhaps better addressed once Kristina was located and returned. Greg studied the old man's face for a long moment, the composed stillness of it, the very slight tension around the eyes that he recognized now as guilt being contained rather than absent. You knew, Greg said. You knew she was doing something and you never told me what it was. Marcellus said nothing. Which was its own answer. At the corridor outside, Serafina stood with her back against the wall and her arms crossed over her chest. She had heard enough. Not all of it. Enough. She looked down at the Luna mark on her collarbone, still raised, still tender, and understood for the first time that she had been crowned in a hall whose foundation she did not know and could not hold. Greg found Kristina's private study locked. He broke the door himself. The room was bare except for one thing, a single sheet of paper on the desk in Kristina's clean, unhurried handwriting. Not a letter. Not an explanation. One line, written as if it were simply a fact she was leaving behind for whoever arrived eventually. If the rites fail for 3 full moons, Ravenshade will turn on itself. Greg stood in the empty room with the paper in his hand for a long time. Outside, somewhere in the training yard, a wolf began to howl at a sun that had not yet set. The dead northern woods had no other name. Whatever had grown here before the last curse war had not grown back. The trees still stood, tall and pale as bone, but they bore no leaves, no birds, no sound except the soft compression of Kristina's footsteps on ground that had forgotten how to be earth. She was still in the pale gold ceremony gown. The hem was ruined, darkened with tunnel water and forest soil. She had pinned the skirt above her knees with the cord from her warding journal. She looked like a painting of a woman who had survived something. She did not particularly care. The broken bond ached beneath her sternum, not sharp but constant, the way a bruise protests pressure long after the blow. She filed it in the part of her mind reserved for things to be dealt with later and kept moving. She heard the scout at the 20-minute mark. He was competent. Moved quietly, stayed downwind, used the tree spacing well. If she had been running blind he would have had her before the hour was out. But she had not been running blind since she left the chamber, and she had read the moon snare instructions from a set of tactical records the elders had filed under obsolete warding methods, records they had clearly never expected a Luna to take seriously. She laid the snare in 4 minutes and sat on a root to wait. He stumbled into the configuration 6 minutes later, turning, stopping, turning again, caught in a loop of redirected intent that was invisible from the outside and completely disorienting from within. She stepped into his sight line when she judged he had been unsettled enough. He was young. Ravenshade gray, scout insignia, hand near his blade but not on it. "You were sent to find me," she said. "Not a question." He straightened. "Alpha Guardman. I know who sent you." She kept her voice even. "I'm going to release the ward. Before I do, I need you to carry a message back. Word for word." He nodded. "Tell Alpha Greg Gartman I am not missing," she said. "I am gone." She released the snare. He stood still for a moment, recalibrating, then looked back at her with something that was not quite fear and not quite awe. "Go," she said. Not unkindly. He went. She turned north and kept walking. The sanctuary appeared as the moon reached its midpoint, a dense cluster of pale trunks that resolved, on closer approach, into the remains of carved foundation stones and a doorway that had survived everything around it. Light came from inside. Older than torchlight. The woman within looked up without surprise. She was old in the way of things that have lasted past their expected span, not frail but compressed, reduced to only what was essential and entirely present. Her eyes were deep gray and they moved over Kristina with the attention of someone taking inventory. They stopped on the moon key at her belt. "Sit down," the woman said. She cleaned Kristina's cut palm without asking permission and without gentleness, which Kristina found she preferred. Then she sat back. "I am Eloan. I have been waiting for the last honest Luna of a cursed house for longer than you have been alive." Kristina listened for an hour without moving. She had known about the pact, the ancestor, the shadow wolf spirit, the corruption written into the alpha bloodline. She had believed she understood it. She had not known about the original sealing. The first time the curse threatened to break, the alpha of that generation had not renewed the wards. He had taken his Luna, a woman who loved him, who had bled for the pack in silence, and bound her permanently to the Moonheart. Used her sacrifice to reconstruct the curse's container from the inside. Then written no record of her name. Since then, every true Luna had stepped unknowingly into the same architecture. The mate bond was the mechanism. A bonded Luna's blood was the only substance the wards recognized. The elders had known for 4 generations. And every Luna had been chosen, courted, bonded, and silenced, not only because she was loved but because she was necessary. Kristina sat with this for a long moment. She thought of 3 years of descending the stairway. The monthly bleeding she had called service, called love, called choice. She thought of the elders framing it, "The pack needs you, the pack cannot know." She had believed them because she had wanted to, because loving Greg and serving Ravenshade had felt like the same gesture, and she had been very skilled at making her pain feel like purpose. "You can teach me to break it," she said. "Not a question either." "I can," Eloan said. "But breaking it permanently requires alpha blood, Luna blood, the Moonheart destroyed, and the full truth spoken aloud before witnesses. Every lie Ravenshade was built on will be exposed." "Good," Kristina said. Eloan studied her. "You are angrier than you appear." "I appear very calm," Kristina said. "I am furious. I have decided those are not in conflict." Eloan rose and held her lamp close to the sanctuary's far wall, where the stone had never been plastered. The carving ran along the base in the old tongue, deep cut, built to last. Kristina crouched beside her and read it. "When the false Luna wears red, the true Luna must choose whether the wolf house burns or is reborn." She stayed crouched before it for a long moment, her ruined gold hem pooling on the stone floor. Then she stood up. "When do we begin?" she said. Serafina had imagined this differently. She had imagined the household responding to her voice the way households responded to women who wore power naturally, with the particular attentiveness of people who understood who was now in charge. She had imagined the elders deferring, the she-wolves softening, the pack orienting toward her the way a room orients toward a lit fire. Instead, by the second morning of her reign, the kitchens had produced spoiled meat for the 3rd time in 2 days. Not old meat. Fresh meat, slaughtered that morning, that turned gray and wrong-smelling between the block and the table as if something in the hall's air had decided to reject it. A child in the east corridor had bitten his mother's hand hard enough to draw blood and had not been able to explain why. 3 of the night post warriors had simply left, walked off their positions before dawn after reporting whispers from the tree line, voices they could not identify saying things they refused to repeat. Serafina ordered a unity feast. She chose the date, the menu, the seating arrangement. She wore the Luna crown, a narrow gold circlet set with amber stones, and sat beside Greg at the high table and smiled at everything that needed smiling at. The pack smiled back with their mouths. Their eyes were somewhere else. She cornered Marcellus in the corridor outside the elder wing that afternoon. She kept her voice controlled and her chin level and asked him directly why the pack was refusing her. Marcellus was quiet for a moment in the specific way of a man selecting how much truth to release. Then he told her that the Luna title carried more than Greg's mark. The true Luna had to be recognized, by the land, by the bloodline, by the moon heart beneath the hall. Seraphina had the ceremony. She had the bite. She did not have the moonheart's acceptance, and without it, the pack's deeper instincts would not settle. "What is the moon heart?" she said. Marcellus looked past her shoulder. "Something Kristina managed." Seraphina stood very still. And Greg knew about this? The silence that followed told her everything she needed and nothing she wanted. She walked back to the Alpha wing with her hands closed at her sides and her face composed and something new and hot sitting in her chest that she recognized, after a moment, as the specific fury of a woman who has been placed on a stage without being told what the play required. She had not been chosen. She had been positioned. There was a difference and she was only now understanding it. Greg was in Kristina's study. He had been returning to it every evening since he broke the door, methodically working through the shelves she had left bare of everything except what she wanted him to find. He had found more than the warning note. In the false bottom of the desk drawer, a compartment he would never have located if he had not been looking with the desperation of a man running out of options, he had found a secondary journal. Older. Water-stained at the corners. He read it for 2 hours without stopping. The rogue uprising 2 years ago, which he had believed he had suppressed through alpha authority and strategic positioning, Kristina had identified the instigating bloodline 3 weeks earlier through her ward work and quietly brokered a private arrangement with the family's elder, defusing it before it reached him. He had never known there was anything to defuse. The harvest failure the winter before last, which the pack had weathered without crisis. She had spent 6 weeks in correspondence with 2 neighboring territories, arranging silent grain agreements that asked for nothing in return except her personal word that Ravenshade would honor future reciprocal obligations. Agreements made in her name. Not his. The nights he had noticed her absent from their bed and assumed she needed solitude, the ward renewal dates. 14 of them marked in the journal's margins. 14 descents into the chamber beneath the hall. 14 bleedings into stone while he slept above her. He sat with the journal in his lap and thought about every morning he had watched her move slowly and assumed she was being delicate. Every council meeting where he had seen her distracted and assumed she was not fully present. Every time he had looked at her careful quietness and read it as a temperament rather than a cost. He was still angry. He wanted her back because the pack was fracturing and he needed her competence, and the alternative was watching Ravenshade collapse under his rule. He knew this about himself with the same cold clarity he applied to tactical problems, and he did not yet have the honesty to call it by its correct name. But his hands holding the journal were not steady. The unity feast began at sundown. The great hall was lit, the tables were set, the pack was assembled out of duty rather than joy. Seraphina sat in the Luna seat in her crown and her composed expression. Greg sat beside her and said the necessary words. The food reached the tables without spoiling, which felt like a negotiated concession rather than a natural thing. Then the floor moved. Not violently, no crack, no collapse. A slow spreading fracture running from beneath the throne platform toward the center of the hall, following the line of the oldest foundation stones, silent and deliberate as something waking from a long sleep. Every wolf in the room went still. The whisper rose through the stone itself, not from any single point, not from any visible source, but from the hall's foundations, from the walls, from the air above the fracture, from everywhere and below everything at once. Bring back the one who bled for you. The feast did not resume. No one at the high table spoke. Seraphina's hand, resting on the table's surface, had gone white at the knuckles. Greg stared at the fracture line running across his hall's black marble floor and said nothing. In the silence, one of the older she-wolves at the back of the room began to weep quietly. No one asked her why. They all understood. The map did not show land. Kristina had known this intellectually, she had carried it for 2 years, had consulted it in the chamber's dim light often enough to have its general shape memorized. But she had always read it in the context of the wards, as a maintenance document, a tool for knowing which bloodlines needed the seal's attention. She had never read it the way Eloan was teaching her to read it now, as a history. As a verdict. Spread flat on the sanctuary's stone table in full lamplight, the blood map was a different object than the one she thought she knew. The silver lines were clean. Whole families, generations of them, untouched by the original pack's corruption, their names glowing soft and steady. Most of the pack's common wolves. The kitchen families. The younger warriors. The children born in the last decade, who had entered a world where Kristina's monthly renewals had kept the curse below the threshold of transmission. The black lines were something else. Greg's lineage ran through the map's center like a wound that had never properly closed, saturated, pulsing faintly even removed from the chamber, the curse written so deep into his bloodline that 3 generations of ward work had only ever contained it rather than diminished it. Several of the senior elders branched from the same dark root. Marcellus. 2 others whose names Kristina had always found in the meeting records but never in the chamber archives. Their corruption was lighter. Secondary infection, Eloan explained, the result of sustained proximity to an unacknowledged alpha curse over decades. And at the map's edges, small dark smudges, barely visible. Children. 4 of them, the youngest no more than 3. Early signs, Eloan said. Not yet symptomatic. Reversible if the curse was broken while they were still young. Kristina stared at those 4 smudges for a long time. She was allowed to hate Greg. She had decided this clearly as a matter of personal accounting, and she did not intend to revise it. But hate was a position she held about a man. These were children who had been born into a lie they had not authored and could not name, and they were beginning to carry something in their blood that would hollow them out from the inside if no one stopped it. This was the part the elders had counted on. Not her love for Greg. Her decency. Tell me the difference again, she said. Between sealing and breaking. Eloan had told her once already. She wanted to hear it again with the map in front of her. Sealing is what you have been doing, Eloan said. Monthly renewal. The curse stays contained, the moonheart holds, the lie continues. The pack survives. You bleed. The children are protected as long as you maintain the wards. The moment you stop or die, it begins again. And breaking. Alpha blood and Luna blood given together over the moonheart. The stone destroyed. The original pack's terms publicly renounced before witnesses who understand what they are witnessing. The curse ends. Permanently. But every truth the sealing kept buried comes with it. Kristina was quiet. I don't want to bleed for them again, she said. It was not a complaint. It was a statement of fact delivered without apology. I know, Eloan said. That is why this time it must be your decision, not your function. Before, the system bled you without your full understanding. This time you would choose it knowing the full cost. The act would be the same. The meaning would not. Kristina was still holding this when the ward perimeter signaled. She intercepted them a quarter mile from the sanctuary, 4 guards, better equipped than the first scout, moving in a sweep formation. She folded the forest around them with 3 ward configurations and stepped into the clearing in front of the youngest one before he had time to register her presence. He was perhaps 19. He stopped with his hand halfway to his blade and then lowered it slowly when he read her expression. Please, he said. He had the particular rawness in his voice of someone who has rehearsed a speech and abandoned it on arrival. My sister. She's 6. She started howling in her sleep 4 nights ago and she can't stop and the healers don't know what's wrong, and Elder Marcellus said. I know what's wrong with her, Kristina said. His face broke open in the way young faces break when relief and fear arrive simultaneously. Will you come back? She looked at him for a long moment. 19 years old. A little sister who howled in her sleep and could not be told why. This was not Greg's guilt being weaponized. This was simply what it looked like when a lie ran long enough to reach the people who had nothing to do with making it. Go back, she said. Tell them I received the message. She sent him away with a ward seal she pressed into his palm, a temporary stabilizer for early-stage corruption that would hold his sister's symptoms quiet for 2 weeks. Not a cure. Enough time to make a decision. She walked back to the sanctuary and stood at the table with the blood map spread before her and the moon key in her hand. She turned it once. Felt its weight. Thought about the unnamed Luna bound to the moonheart 4 generations back, who had not been given a choice and whose name no record had kept. She thought about 4 children with dark smudges at the edges of a map. She set the key down on the table. If I return, she said, Ravenshade will not get its Luna back. She looked up at Eloan. It will get its judgment. He came alone. No escort, no guard formation, no ceremonial cloak. Just Greg Gartman on foot in plain traveling leather, following the old moon signs carved into the tree-lined stones. Markers so ancient that most Ravenshade wolves did not know they existed, let alone how to read them. Kristina had taught herself their meaning from the same archive the elders had never expected her to study seriously. She was standing beneath the sanctuary's broken arch when he emerged from the tree line. She had known he was coming for 20 minutes. She had not moved to meet him and she did not move now. He stopped a few feet away and looked at her. She watched him take in what she had become in 2 weeks of exile. The traveling clothes, the calm she wore like something permanently settled rather than performed, the moon key at her belt in plain sight. She watched him search her face for the woman who had stood in the golden hall with her hand over her mouth, and not find her. "Kristina?" he said. She said nothing. He apologized. The words were not poorly chosen. He had clearly prepared them, had perhaps rehearsed them on the long walk here. He spoke about pressure, about the elders, about the weight of the alpha position and the expectations of bloodline succession. He used the word mistake twice. He said he had not understood. When he finished, the silence sat between them like a third presence. "Say what you did," Kristina said. "Not what happened to you. What you did." His jaw tightened. "I've just..." "You explained." "I'm asking you to name it." Her voice was level. "Not cold, exactly, something more precise than cold. Start with the bond." He looked at her for a long moment. Then something in his posture shifted. Not collapse, but the specific deflation of a man releasing the last of a position he no longer has the strength to hold. "I marked Serafina while you were still bonded to me," he said. "And the ceremony. I let the pack watch." "I didn't," he stopped. "I let you stand there. In front of everyone. And my work. This one cost him more." She watched it move across his face. "I took what you did for granted. I didn't ask what the wards required. I didn't ask what the descents cost you. I accepted the results and I didn't look for the source. And the elders. I let them use you." Quieter now. "They told me you were managing certain traditions. I chose not to ask what that meant. And the last one." He met her eyes. "I chose pride over truth. Over you. Over the pack, as it turns out." Kristina studied him. He looked diminished, not broken. Greg Gartman was not a man who broke easily but reduced. The way a fire looks when it has been burning a long time and what remains is still hot but no longer large. Then he knelt. Not gracefully. Not as ceremony or romantic gesture. He knelt the way a man kneels when his legs have run out of argument, one knee on the cold stone floor of the ruined sanctuary, his head not bowed but level, his eyes on hers. An alpha on his knees before a woman he had publicly discarded. "The pack is failing," he said. 3 warriors shifted without cause this morning. The children in the nursery won't sleep. The hall floor cracks further every night. Pause. "I'm asking you to come back. Not as my mate. I understand that is gone. As the only person who can stop what I started." Kristina was quiet for a moment. "Then hear my terms," she said. "All of them. Once." She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Serafina would be stripped of all sacred Luna authority, title without function, which was what she had always held, and now the pack would know it. The elders who had known, Marcellus and the others, would make full public confession before the council, named and specific. Greg would reveal the curse publicly in the Golden Hall before the entire pack. Kristina would answer to no mate bond, no alpha authority, no claim of any kind. She would return as curse breaker and be received as such, or she would not come at all. And if Greg lied to her once about anything in any direction, she would leave and the wards would fail, and Ravenshade would discover what it had always been without her holding it together. Greg listened without interruption. "Agreed," he said. "I don't need your agreement," Kristina said. "I need your compliance." Agreement implies you are granting something. You are not granting anything. You are accepting the only terms under which this pack survives. He stayed kneeling. Something moved across his face. Not grief exactly, not shame exactly, something that lived between them where a man finally sees a thing clearly and understands there is no version of the seeing that reflects well on him. Kristina stepped past him toward the tree line. Toward Ravenshade. "Do not walk beside me," she said without turning. "You lost that place." Behind her, she heard him rise. He followed at a distance. She wore white. Not the pale gold of a Luna preparing to be loved. Not the gray of mourning. Plain white, the color of nothing claimed and nothing owed, the color a woman wears when she is done performing for other people's comfort. The pack gathered in the Golden Hall and watched her walk through the main doors, and the silence that fell was a different kind than the silence that had fallen when Greg marked Serafina 3 weeks ago. That silence had been celebration suppressing itself into ceremony. This one was something closer to recognition. She walked to the center of the hall and stopped. The same black marble floor. The same gold wolf banners. The same carved stone pillars and stained glass panels and vaulted ceiling that had witnessed her erasure. The hall had not changed. She had. The room seemed to understand this before most of the people in it did. Serafina was standing beside the throne platform in the Luna crown, her jaw set and her eyes bright with the particular fear of a woman who has spent 3 weeks watching her position erode and has decided that the only available move is forward. "You abandoned this pack," she said. Her voice carried. She had a good voice for carrying. "You left in the night like a coward and let wolves suffer while you—" "I abandoned no one," Kristina said. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. "I protected this pack for 3 years in silence. I abandoned it the night Greg abandoned our vows and the elders abandoned the truth. There is a difference between leaving and being driven out. The pack can decide which one happened when they know everything." She turned to Greg. "Open the hall." He held her gaze for a moment. Then he nodded to the senior guard, who moved aside the throne's ceremonial floor panel, the one Kristina had described to Greg in exact detail on the walk back, the location she had never revealed to him in 3 years of partnership, and revealed the hidden stairway descending into dark. The smell reached the hall before the sight did. Cold iron and deep earth and the organic wrongness of something alive that should not be alive, rising through the opening like exhaled breath from a body that had been holding it for too long. The wolves nearest the stairway stepped back. Some shifted involuntarily, the low unwilling kind that the body does without permission when it encounters something the instincts classify as threat. Then the roots became visible. Curling up through the stone, black and thick and moving with the slow insistence of things that have been growing in the dark for a very long time and have finally found an opening. The hall did not erupt. It went still in the way of people confronting something they cannot immediately categorize. Marcellus stepped forward. "This is old architecture," he said. "Structural settlement. There is no need for—" "Tell them what you told me," Kristina said. "When I first found the chamber. Tell them exactly what you said, and tell them how long you had known it before I arrived." The old elder looked at her. Then at the roots. Then at the faces of the pack surrounding him, people he had led and advised and managed for decades, people who were looking at him now with the dawning expression of those who have begun counting backward and recalculating. He confessed. Not completely, not without hedging, not without the careful language of a man trying to minimize his own accounting. But enough. The forbidden pact. The original Luna sacrifice. For generations of alphas who had known and said nothing. For generations of Lunas who had bled in the chamber below without understanding the full architecture of what they were sustaining. The elders had known. They had believed Kristina's love for the pack, her love for Greg, would keep her functioning as the mechanism required, quiet, willing, and silent. The pack turned on them the way a tide turns. No dramatics. Simply a collective reorientation, the specific sound of a room full of people deciding they are no longer where they thought they were standing. Serafina sank onto the throne's bottom step. The Luna crown caught the torchlight but her hands were shaking. She understood now what Marcellus had told her weeks ago in plainer terms. The title was the performance. Kristina had been the function. And with the function exposed for every wolf in the hall to see, the performance became what it had always been. Nothing. "We begin the ritual," Kristina said. She descended the stairway. Greg followed without being asked. In the chamber, the roots had spread further than her last visit. They covered the walls now, pressing into every joint, the moonhearts pulse faster and shallower than before, the way a heartbeat quickens when the body is under threat. Kristina opened her palm at the old cut, the scar already there, a small economy. Greg drew his blade and did the same without flinching. Blood met stone. The shadow wolf came from below the moonheart, rising through the roots the way smoke rises through a structure that is already burning underneath. First a suggestion of shape, then a density, then a presence that occupied the chamber's cold air with the weight of accumulated generations. It spoke in the layered way of many voices pressed into one, the voices of dead alphas, each one adding its register to the sound. It named Greg's weaknesses with the specific accuracy of something that had been watching from beneath his bloodline since his birth. Greg's hands went to his sides. She felt him beginning to concede to it, the particular stillness of a man whose defenses have been correctly named. "Stand up," Kristina said. He looked at her. "It knows every failure you've made because it lives in your bloodline. It has always been there." Her voice was even. "Stand up and face what your family built. That is the only way this ends." Above them, she heard the pack gathered at the top of the stairway. Waiting. Greg straightened. The moon heart cracked, a single clean fracture running from its center outward, light escaping from the break like something that had been compressed for a very long time. The shadow wolf lunged. It moved like consequence, fast and directionless and everywhere at once, pouring through the cracked moon heart and up the stairway and into the golden hall before the pack had time to understand what was coming. Wolves scattered. A section of the eastern wall buckled inward. The gold banners caught the shadow's wake and tore. Children were pulled under tables. Warriors shifted and found their forms offering no advantage against something that had no body to bite. Kristina came up the stairway behind it with the moon key in one hand and the blood map opened flat against her forearm. The map was changing. She had expected this. Eloan had warned her that during the breaking, the blood map would become active, each infected line flaring as the curse tried to consolidate rather than disperse. What she had not expected was the way the shadow wolf moved toward the darkest names first. Not the warriors. Not Greg. The children. The 4 small smudges at the map's edges, now burning black, the curse trying to anchor itself in the most vulnerable bloodlines before the Moonheart's destruction could complete. She understood then what Eloan had told her. The curse fed on secrecy. Not just blood secrecy. Every hidden betrayal had made it stronger. Every silenced Luna had deepened its roots. It had grown fat on 4 generations of truth suppressed, and now, with the Moonheart cracked and the ritual begun, it was trying to survive by burying itself further. Greg. She did not shout. He heard her anyway. Now. He stepped forward onto the platform in front of his pack, with the shadow wolf moving through his hall and the roots splitting his floor and every wolf in the room watching him. She saw him gather himself, not for her, not yet, but for the people around him who were afraid. My bloodline made a forbidden pact, he said. His voice was unsteady at first, then not. 4 generations ago. The power Ravenshade was built on was borrowed from something that required a price, and every alpha since has known it and kept it and let the Lunas carry the cost. He looked at Kristina once. Kristina Walton protected this pack for 3 years. She bled for it in secret. She kept the curse contained while I ruled above her and took the results and never asked the source. The words landed in the hall's silence like stones dropped into still water. I dishonored her. In this hall. In front of all of you. And she saved you anyway. The shadow wolf shuddered. Not defeated, but diminished. The secrecy that had fed it for decades was being starved in real time, each named truth reducing its density, and Kristina watched the blood map respond. The black lines thinning, the 4 children's marks beginning slowly to silver at the edges. Movement near the far wall caught her eye. Serafina, who had been pressed against the stone during the chaos, had not fled. She was crouched over a small girl, one of the nursery children who had broken from her mother in the panic. Her red gown pooled around both of them, her body curved over the child's as debris fell from the shaking walls. Not a performance. No one was watching her. She was simply a woman doing the only useful thing available to her in a moment that had stripped everything else away. Kristina turned back to the Moonheart. She pressed the moon key into the crack. She pressed her cut palm flat against its surface one final time, not for Greg, not for the elders, not for the pack's gratitude, but for the unnamed Luna 4 generations back whose sacrifice had been used without her consent, whose name no record had kept, who had carried this burden first and longest and most completely alone. This ends here, she thought. For all of us. She broke it. The sound was not loud. A clean fracture, a release of compressed light, a silence that followed it so complete that for 3 full seconds the entire hall, wolves, shadow, firelight, chaos, simply stopped. Then the shadow wolf came apart. Not violently. It dispersed the way a held breath disperses, outward and upward and gone, the voices of the dead alphas fading through the registers until there was nothing left but the smell of cold iron and old earth and the particular stillness of a space that has been released from a very long occupation. The mate bond broke with it. She had expected pain. What arrived instead was silence, clean and total and entirely her own, the first silence inside her body since the night 3 years ago when she had first bonded to Greg Gartman and taken on everything that came with him. She stood in the middle of Ravenshade's ruined golden hall and felt the absence of his presence in her chest like a window opened after a long winter. Cold. Necessary. Hers. The pack was still. Then one by one the elders were named. Removed. Escorted from the hall by the senior warriors without ceremony and without violence, which was a more complete humiliation than either. Greg remained on the platform, Alpha still, the pack's anchor still, but the hall's silence made clear that his authority was now a watched thing, a conditional thing, an authority that had been tested and found insufficient and would carry that finding forward into every decision he made from here. He came to her when the hall had settled. Stay, he said. Quietly for her alone. Not as Luna if you don't want the title. Not under any claim. Just stay. We can build something different than what we had. I understand what I did now. I understand what you are. Kristina looked at him. The man who had stood in black and gold in this hall and marked another woman without once looking for her in the crowd. She looked at him without hatred, without grief, without the ache that had lived beneath her sternum for weeks. Only with clarity. The woman who loved you enough to bleed in secret died the night you marked another Luna, she said. I'm not her anymore. The woman standing here saved your pack because innocent wolves deserved life. Not because you deserved her return. She paused. Those are different things, Greg. You should learn to tell them apart. She walked toward the main doors. The pack saw her coming and they knelt. Not commanded, not orchestrated, simply the instinctive response of wolves who had spent 3 weeks discovering what she had been and understood now what they were watching leave. She moved through the corridor they made for her, the broken moon key in her hand, her white gown stained with blood and ash and the particular markings of a woman who had done an enormous thing and was now finished with the place that required it. The dawn was beginning outside. Gray at first, then pale gold, the color she had worn the night everything ended, the color she would not wear again. She did not look back. Behind her, Greg Gartman stood alone in the ruined glory of the hall he had almost destroyed. The red claiming cloth lay burned on the floor. The gold banners hung torn from the rafters. The throne platform was cracked through the center. He had marked another Luna to prove Kristina Walton could be replaced. By dawn, every wolf in Ravenshade knew the truth. She had never been the woman beside the alpha. She had been the wall between them and ruin. Kristina did not leave as a rejected Luna. She left as the woman no alpha could claim, no pack could own, and no betrayal could destroy. So I need to ask you, did she do the right thing by walking away, or should she have taken control of Ravenshade herself? Subscribe because Kristina's silence saved them once. Her absence may destroy them.